Thank you everyone for being with us. Good afternoon. My name is Liana Anderson and I am UCLA class of 1996 in psychology, and I'm one of the founding board members of the UCLA Mixed Alumni Association and the current vice president. And I am also on the UCLA Diversity Advisory Committee. Welcome to EmPower Hour. This is part 2 in our series, Understanding the Mixed Women's Experience as we celebrate Women's History Month. In part 1, we took a deep dive into trauma, its definitions, and its relationship to mixed women in our society. And if you didn't attend part 1, or if you didn't watch the replay, the link is going to be in the chat, and you can also find it on our website. Sadly, it seems like there's almost daily reminders of trauma. There are traumatic events occurring pretty much every day that are inflicting new wounds, that are opening old ones, trying to tear at the scars that we formed from healing, especially with recent tragic events targeting Asian women in Georgia and a seemingly random shooting at a grocery store in Colorado. We're reminded that we are constantly surrounded by traumas, big but also small, and many of us are left wondering what to do. So our panel returns to walk us through radical self-care. Self-care as we know it, that we have seen in the media and in social media, seems to have replaced the notion of me time. But we're going to hear from our 3 experts who are going to reframe what self-care can be in a more profound way. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel. Deidre Staten graduated from UCLA Law School's Critical Race Studies program in 2013, where she gained expertise in the intersection between race, history, and the law. She's the founder and chief diversity consultant at SCG Diversity Consulting, which provides businesses, nonprofits, and educational institutions with comprehensive diversity, anti-racism, and inclusion education, training, and programming. Welcome, Deidre. And then we have Dr. Ilona Salmons, who received her BA in psychology from UCLA in 2007 and a master's degree and doctorate from Pepperdine, where she focused her research on wellness in highly demanding workplaces. She is a leadership consultant and licensed therapist with private practice in Los Angeles, where she works with high achieving professionals and organizations to promote mental wellness in the workplace by addressing and resolving underlying organizational issues that contribute to chronic stress and burnout. And last but not least, we have Christina Alford, who is a Bruin friend, who earned her bachelor's degree from St. John's University and her master's degree in corporate communications from New York University. Christina is a public relations executive working across a multitude of industries for top PR firms in New York and Los Angeles within the lifestyle space. She's currently the Senior Vice President of Lifestyle and Culture at DKC Public Relations. Christina has led the efforts behind the recently launched Culture Division at her current agency, where she helps clients connect to BIPOC audiences while helping to increase minority representation within their industry. Welcome to both Ilona, Christina, and Deidre. Thank you so much, ladies, for taking out the valuable time in your really busy schedules to be with us this afternoon. So once again, we're going to get things started with our therapist, Ilona, who is going to connect our previous conversation about trauma with our topic today.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm not all of your therapists, I'm just a therapist, but I am bringing the therapist perspective to this conversation because I think it is an important one. And so for those of you who've had an opportunity to either attend or watch the first part of this series, I'm not going to get into as much detail as I did last time, but just to catch the rest of you up in how we define trauma for this specific series is that trauma can be considered in 2 different ways. One is that if something happened that should not have happened, and so that's more the traditional definition of trauma. There's some type of an event that's very upsetting, potentially harmful to your physical well-being, potentially harmful to your emotional well-being. And so it's something that happened that should not have happened. The second category of traumas are things that didn't happen but should have happened. And so the example that I used last time is, for instance, a child who should be receiving love and attention is being neglected by their parent. And so having that type of experience can be very traumatic, is very traumatic for a lot of people. In this particular context, when it comes to this topic that we're talking about with the mixed race experience and especially the mixed women's experience, we define trauma as things that could be happening on a large scale. So it could be one big event that could be traumatic, for instance, seeing another instance of police brutality on the news, or it could be smaller series of less traumatic events, but certainly add up over time. So things like microaggressions in the workplace. And then when you attempt to talk about those microaggressions, people invalidate what your experiences are. And so we'll continue to use this definition for our discussion today.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that. I know we discussed this a little bit last time, but the interconnectedness of trauma and how, particularly for people of color, trauma is cumulative. It has cumulative effects. You know, all of those little daily microaggressions, all of those, you know, just daily affronts that people face year after year, whether it's, you know, something that's macro level that is experienced or something much, you know, smaller, but still significant, that is carried with people throughout their lives. And so I think we need to expand the way we think about trauma, not just as an acute instance, but as something, you know, larger than that, something that's tied together and that, you know, has cumulative effects and cumulative impact.
Right, and just
Before
to kind of, oh, go ahead.
So I was actually, Christina, I was going to ask you before we moved on to our discussion about self-care, could you talk a little bit about like our lack of a home base with identity, especially in the workplace?
Yeah, for sure. As a mixed race, so I am Filipino, Japanese, and Black. I identify as Black and Asian multiracial. So I can probably count the number of minorities within even my workplace. I've worked in PR for over 15 years. And that's 15 years in New York City. So New York City is a mini globe. And representation within the PR industry itself, I believe the breakdown is only 13% of leadership in the C-suite are on agency boards or non-white, and 24% of the PR workforce at US agencies are non-white. So really trying to find your place within such a white space is very challenging, especially for young minority women trying to make their mark within the corporate worlds. It can be very intimidating. You know, many times we're silenced in the boardroom, and you know, many times throughout my career, I've even ignored insensitive, racially charged statements. So yes, finding that home base, finding allies within the workplace is important, and especially now with the current climate in society.
Can I just add one quick thing? I think even in addition to that, finding a home base within Black identity and within whatever identity group it is that you are mixed between can be really difficult. Some people brought this up, I think, in their comments last time, which is why I really wanted to touch on this. And it's something I've experienced. It's something Christina and I have talked about repetitively as women of color who are bi or multiracial. You know, it's a form of trauma in and of itself to not feel as though you belong to a specific racial group that you feel like you should belong to, right? That you want to claim ownership of. It's a part of your lived experience. You know, it's a part of how you grew up. It's a part of how you identify. But being pushed out of that group or pulled into another kind of at a cultural or societal whim, you know, being told who you are, how you should identify, whether you're, you know, accepted or not accepted, whether you're Black enough or, you know, Filipino enough. It in and of itself is a form of racial trauma. And so I really just want to mark that for this group specifically, where I think there are a lot of people who identify as mixed race, as biracial, and that's fine, like to accept that and to own that is a thing, right? I know I spent a lot of years like not really understanding that was traumatic. And now that I finally have just sat in it, in all of those traumas of trying to identify, trying to feel accepted, you know, it doesn't feel better in the sense of it continuing to happen, but it feels better in the sense of like me making sense out of a lot of the stuff that has happened throughout my life.
And I think it certainly helps to have a community of people who, especially women, who have also experienced that, to know we're not alone. Because just like you were saying, feeling that trauma, I also have, you know, kind of grappled with, like, what is this feeling? Like sometimes there's feelings of guilt, like, am I not Black enough? Am I not this enough? So it does help to know that we're not alone in that experience. So now that we've talked about trauma and recapped a little bit of our conversation from part one, Alona, can you unpack the terminology of self-care for us? Because I think a lot of people have this notion that self-care is the mani-pedi, it's the massage, it's the time away from the kids. And trust me, those are all good things, but I think we can take it to a deeper level. And so can you talk a little bit about what self-care means in that deeper sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So to set the context for that and to a little bit continue what we just talked about, the last session, we also talked about the system of oppression that all of us exist in. And so when we think about self-care, we have to think of it both in an individual way, in a community way, and within the system of oppression that all of us exist in. And so the term self-care is not a complicated term in and of itself. The definition is right there, right? It's self-care, doing things to take care of yourself. The questions come up when people are not quite sure what is the most effective forms of self-care. And so I like to call, when I talk to my clients about, taking time off, whether it's on a daily basis or more longer time off of work, like vacations, what I encourage them to do is participate in what I call productive, unproductive time. Because there are certain types of self-care that actively help us re-energize and take care of our physical and mental well-being. And then there are other types of self-care which are effective to a certain extent, but if we do them excessively, they don't really provide any additional benefits. And so the latter form of self-care that I'm talking about are things like, zoning out in front of Netflix and watching 82 episodes of Game of Thrones. And so that could be nice, right? In shorter spurts. But doing that for an extended period of time, it doesn't actually have any beneficial effects for you. Whereas research shows things like being out in nature, for instance, or whatever nature we can find in Los Angeles, exercising, meditating, speaking to supportive friends, supportive family, supportive partners, creating a community of people who can understand what your experience is. So positive interpersonal relationships are a form of self-care. And so the most effective form of self-care is the one that you're actually going to do. We're going to talk about some ideas of what some self-care looks like and how it looks like, again, on the individual level, as well as on a community level and on a societal level, or potentially even a global level. But the most effective one is the one that you're actually going to do.
Deidre and Christina, can you talk a little bit about, since now we know that, okay, self-care is not just those shallow things, it's these deeper things. A lot of people are probably wondering, well, what could I do at work? What could I do when I'm out in these different spaces? In your experience as individuals and as your experience as experts in this space, like what are some of the forms of self-care that you've recommended or that you incorporate into your programming?
Sure. So again, I work in PR. I was in New York for over 15 years. And for me personally, my self-care was removing myself from New York, from toxic agencies, from toxic people, and completely relocating myself into LA, into a healthier kind of environment. Really finding that community that's supporting me, really finding an agency that fits within my lifestyle and within what my goals in life. And also PR, it's very demanding. So setting boundaries with clients. This is not a 9-to-5 job, and a lot of us probably don't work in a 9-to-5, but really setting boundaries and saying no, or, you don't need to answer that email right at 10 p.m. That can wait until the morning. Setting boundaries with clients who are texting you all night long. So yeah, making sure that you're setting yourself up success within your own environments, and definitely setting boundaries have helped a lot with me.
And I'm also, before I dive into my own, I'm going to call out some more of Christina's self-care, just because I've participated in it. So Christina has, undertaken a completely new diet that despite my pushing, she refuses to budge from because it has made her feel so much better. So the way that she eats is very tied to her self-care. And she is hiking all the time. Like this woman is hiking every other day. And we've actively sought out like nature activities, even during COVID, isolated with just the two of us or maybe one other person. We've gone to the desert and stayed in a yurt, right? And been terrified in the middle of the night because we could hear coyotes. We've gone to the mountains, to Idlewild, right? So like we are doing things to actively remove ourselves also from being stuck in, the kind of daily habits that COVID has put in place for so many of us. So, and, I know a lot of that's tied to ability and monetary ability to do it. But for us, that has been part of our self-care. For me, more broadly speaking, on like a meta level of what self-care means to me, it's really important to me to always learn, even if it's not something that I'm going to use in my job or use, moving forward. I just love learning. So for me, I'm always reading National Geographic. I am always, looking up just like random facts and statistics. I'm always working with that sort of information, even if it's completely irrelevant to my professional life. I just love knowing random things, and I love creating. So I garden. I'm an avid gardener. I make the hottest hot sauces I can possibly make out of the hottest peppers I can possibly grow in North Hollywood, California, as anyone who knows me can attest to. And that's really important to me. And the other big thing, I think anything that you view as identity affirming self-care. So anything you view as, kind of touching the wall and knowing you're still here, knowing that it's okay to exist as you are, despite what the world is telling you. I find those things really important. So creating things like, I don't know, a podcast. Christina and I started podcasting, creating whatever it is that affirms your existence in the way that you need that existence affirmed. To me, that is also self-care, because we are told a lot of things about ourselves and a lot of things about how it is or isn't okay to exist in the world, as women and as people of color. And I think that, it's really important to affirm our existence the way that we want to.
Alona, in a conversation that we had, I think it was last week, you were talking about disconnecting as a form of self-care. You talked a little bit about it, but with recent events over the last week, can you talk about what that looks like, disconnecting as self-care?
Yeah, thank you. Self-care can be things that we do, but self-care can also be things that we don't do. So when we remove ourselves, like Christina was saying, from perhaps a more toxic corporate environment and finding a job that's more aligned with our values or has more flexibility, or even more people who are like-minded and who are like us, that we can relate to, that we can connect with, or leadership who supports us. And so removing yourself from toxic situations, from toxic relationships, and into more healthier environments. And so certainly our connection with the media and with technology, we're just constantly connected all the time on our phones, on our computers. We're getting bombarded with information from every angle, right? From social media, from newspapers that we might read, from websites that we follow, and so on. We're getting bombarded with this information, but we don't have an active, conscious decision in whether or not we receive this information. And so creating these types of boundaries around our technological use is helpful. Some tips, for instance, are I'm on Instagram, but I have separate Instagram accounts. So I have my personal/professional account, but I also have an activism account, and that's where I follow all of the activism other accounts, so that I can actively log on to that profile, see what's up, what the updates are, see what's going on, learn the information so that I know that I stay informed, but all this information isn't just randomly popping up on my personal social media. So again, we want to be more conscious, and we want to create barriers to having this information really present itself to our consciousness. And so that's a tip that you can use, is you could create another Instagram account or another social media handle where you're actively seeking out certain types of information, but it's just not there every time that you sign into your account. And I certainly still follow some activism accounts on my personal page, but I have, again, a separate account where I just follow all of them. And so I can make the time and conscious decision to expose myself to all this information within a time limited period. And then it just doesn't pop in and, kind of intrude into my day, no matter what I'm doing. it's important to control exposure to these types of traumatic events and to also minimize how informed we are. With the recent tragedies that happened, I mean, there was some information that was released and then a little bit of additional information released later, but many of us can get into this pattern of just constantly reading different news sources and different accounts and this person who was there and what they witnessed and some other account, and even watching videos or looking at photographic images. All of these things are just small little traumas, like Deidre was saying, they can add up, right? They're cumulative. And so set a boundary for yourself on whatever feels appropriate for yourself. And depending on your personality, depending on your career, right? It might be different type of boundaries, but setting a boundary of what makes sense to you so that you feel as informed as you want to be, but you're not oversaturating, again, your consciousness with all of these negative images and all of these very traumatic stories. So figuring out where that boundary stands for you. And boundaries in general, also just having the ability to say no to things at home, in your personal lives, in the workplace. A lot of clients that I work with who are Black women or mixed women, or even Black men or mixed men, they have this pressure, they feel this pressure that they have to prove themselves in the workplace. And so they'll say yes to a lot more things than their counterparts. They'll work twice as hard as their counterparts because they feel like they have to prove themselves or prove their worth to their team. And often they feel this pressure if they are the only or only one of few of people of color on their team. And so making it your responsibility to set the boundaries for yourself, to not put this additional pressure on yourself.
Yeah, and can I just add something to, both the middle and the end of that? I think saying no also might mean saying no to entire people permanently. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm not suggesting that we should just be cutting people off willy-nilly, but I think there are certain people that just do not need to be a part of your life, based on their behavior, based on their actions. And I think this can tie into social media as well. I have definitely over the past year and a half had multiple experiences where people I've been friends with for years, not extremely close with, but that I communicate with still on social media have said and done things that I'm just like, nope, this does not vibe with the type of life I am trying to live. And I'm not doing this anymore. Recently, I essentially had a friend from high school trolling me on Instagram because of, some stuff I said about the Confederate flag and it being racist, right? And he really wanted to engage in a conversation about how it was heritage for people. And I just got to a point where I was like, you know what, this is not my conversation to have with you. You need to go do your own research. If you can find someone else to talk to about this, great. It's not going to be me. I'm not doing this. And so I think it's totally fine to just say no to people or to like entire, relationships with people. And I have done that to, preserve my sanity and my peace in certain situations. And I just want to highlight to, the end of what Alona was just saying there. I think, people of color, regardless of gender, very much do feel this need to prove themselves, right? To prove that they deserve to be there, to prove that they can do the job as well. And there's also, I think, a competing feeling of need to prove that you are not the stereotype, right? That you're not the angry Black woman, to prove that you're not whatever the stereotype is. And that can be really, really difficult to do. So I do think boundaries are the way to get around this. You could go around communicating to everybody that you're not this thing, or you can just set boundaries for engagement, set boundaries for how much work you're going to do. And that's that. And to be honest, that's what I've been doing at work. At least before I went into business for myself, that's what I was doing at work at UCLA for 7 years. And that is how I survived, particularly being on the road and traveling 4 months out of the year, right? There's just a certain time where you're done, and you just have to stop caring if people are going to view this as an extension of all Black women or all Black people with respect to the type of work you're putting in.
Yeah, especially in the workplace. I've been experiencing this past year a lot of coworkers, white coworkers, wanting to have one-off conversations. I'm not racist. I have Black friends. I've never experienced racism growing up. And it's really not your job to give them that validation or that class on race. It's not your job. I work specifically with a lot of minority-owned businesses and brands. So while we're going through George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and helping them through that, I also, work with a lot of Asian brands. So dealing with my everyday with clients, the extra added on stress with people around you who shouldn't be taking up your space should not happen. And that's where you have to draw some boundaries as well.
Yeah, and related to that, I mean, I know so many of us on this Zoom have probably had outreach from our offices, from our bosses during the past year and a half, like, hey, will you head this diversity committee? Hey, will you do this thing? What do you think about what we're doing for Black History Month? What do you think about what we're doing for Pride? What do you think about, you do not have to be the stand-in for your identity marker group. That is not your job. They're not paying you for it. If you feel out of the goodness of your heart that you would like to do those things, sure. But I want to give everyone here permission to say to their boss, I am not paid to be a diversity consultant. I am not paid to be a chief diversity officer. And if you would like to pay me more to do that work, I will happily do it. Because so often that is not what is happening in the workplace. And I just, want to mark that when it comes to drawing boundaries. And that can be hard to hear, especially for bosses who are not from minoritized or marginalized backgrounds, but more of them need to hear it. And I think more of us need to say it.
Right.
Yeah, and absolutely. And just a little plug for you all. I mean, here's a resource right here. Anyone out there listening, here you have 3 experts. You can hire any one or all 3 of these ladies to come into your workplaces to do that work.
Right. And in my case, I actually had my agency hire Deidre because I was sick and tired of all the questions and, just extra added on stress to my day-to-day. So Deidre's a really great resource if you need a DE&I expert.
And even if you don't, you can still say no. You do not have to do the work. You don't have to show up to the DEI committee. You don't have to, you being Black or you being, whatever identity is that you identify as, you don't have to show up and represent all of the people from your racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation group. That is not your job. So we need to own the spaces we want to and not be forced to show up in spaces where we don't want to just because of our identity.
Absolutely. So it sounds like saying no and setting these boundaries is such a major theme. I remember a friend of mine who is a professor at Cal State Dominguez said online, and this was an aha moment for me, self-care is saying no to the things that don't move your personal agenda forward. And I was raised to be a people pleaser, and I'm, at 47, finally eliminating that part of me. But I think if you're raised like that, it is really hard to say no, especially if you're, a woman of color. Yes, you feel like you have to do more. My grandmother always taught us, you have to be better, you have to do better. But we also are able to say no. So that brings us to the question about taking care of ourselves before we take care of others. And I'm just going to open it up to anyone on the panel to talk about that. And doing the research to find out what are those things that you specifically need as a person of color to fill those needs of self-care.
Sure. So,
go ahead, P.
Want to go? You can go, Day. It's fine.
I was just going to say, just to reiterate, the first piece there. I think it's totally fine. My mom and dad are on here, and they're not going to like this, but I think it's totally fine to just cut off social media and your phone and your email. There are days where I'm just unreachable. It's not, unless you show up knocking on my door, you are not going to talk to me. And a lot of my very close friends know, you might have to beg me to come out of my house sometimes. It takes a lot for me to recharge. I think a lot of people think I'm an extrovert. I very much think I'm an introvert because of the amount of time it takes me to recoup after I've been engaging with people. And I think that's fine. So I think shutting down, just spending time alone and doing whatever it is you want to do is also perfectly fine. That's all I wanted to say there. So Christina, go ahead with whatever you're gonna add.
Sure. And just to kind of address that second part about taking care of others, I mean, you definitely cannot help anybody else until you actually have yourself together. So, and I've actually had to learn that the hard way, but now that I've kind of established myself in my career and my position, a lot of my joy comes from supporting and championing all the minority talent underneath me, right? So we've all been there. We've all done the work. It's hard. It's hard working within this very white structure. So really championing and, making sure talent feels supported, they have someone to talk to, they have mentorship is a very, very important part and piece of this whole thing and all our efforts.
And I'd like to highlight that how Christina started saying that is you have to take care of yourself first, right? So if you have things to give, then that is a wonderful way to give back and a wonderful way to feel good about what it is that you're doing for your community. But that's a big if, right? If you are already taking care of yourself. And so, along this theme of being people pleasers or feeling the pressure to support other people, it's important for us to recognize that guilt should never be a motivator for doing something. And so there are two types of guilt, right? There's the guilt that you feel because you did something you shouldn't have done and you know you shouldn't have done it and you knew better, and then you feel guilt. And so when you change your behavior, the guilt goes away because now you're going to be more aligned with your integrity. The second type of guilt is a guilt that a lot of people who are people pleasers that they experience. So that type of guilt is you are advocating for yourself, or you're putting your needs first, or you're standing in alignment with your truth, and somebody else doesn't like it, or it's inconvenient for somebody else. And so then you end up feeling guilty because you feel like you're selfish, or that inner self-talk comes up that you should be helping other people, or that this person is displeased with you, and so you want to fix it, you want to make them like you want to make them happy. And so you have the second type of guilt come up. And so for a lot of people, when they have the second type of guilt come up, they also listen to the guilt and they say, oh no, I made a mistake, let me correct the behavior. And so if they initially try to set a boundary and then this guilt comes up, they go back on their boundary and then they accommodate whatever is that person, whatever their request was. And so what I teach and encourage clients to do is to notice the difference between the guilts, because again, there's one guilt that you feel because you're not aligned with your truth. And in that case, it's important to align yourself with your truth. The second type of guilt is the guilt that you feel when you are aligned with your truth, but you've been socialized to not prioritize your own needs, right? Or again, to please others or to prove yourself. And so with the second type of guilt, the correct approach is to notice the guilt, to listen to what it's telling you, to be curious, but to not react to it. So you can acknowledge and you can say to yourself, I feel guilty because I have become accustomed to putting my needs second, but I'm going to choose to put my needs first, even if I feel guilty. And so you will still continue to feel guilt in the second example. And sometimes the guilt can even get worse in the short term, because again, you're doing something other than how you've become accustomed to relating to other people. And so you are standing in your worth, but you're doing something that's not how you've been socialized to behave. And so you have this inner self-talk that's telling you that you're selfish, or that you're doing something wrong, or that people are not going to like you. And your job is just to manage that emotion, to notice it, to honor it, but not to react to it. And over time, as long as you continue to, again, stand in your truth and engage in these behaviors that are aligned with what's important for you, including, like your self-care practices or putting your needs first, over time, that guilt will go away because you will learn a new way of relating to people. And so maybe one of the other panelists wants to talk a little bit about this as well, but one of the things that we talked about, I think in the first session, but certainly in our meetings since then, is this idea, this concept of Black fatigue or mixed race fatigue, that we feel this pressure that we always have to be doing something and being active. And no matter what we do, right, it feels like it's not enough because we're in this system of oppression. And so allowing yourself to just say, okay, I feel guilty because I think that I should be doing more. And it's still important for me to take care of myself because, like Christina said, unless I take care of myself, I'm not going to be the most effective member of my community, the most effective mentor, the most effective family member, partner, employee, therapist, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that notion, the taking care of yourself notion, that really is at the bottom of what radical self-care is, right? It's taking care of yourself before you take care of others. And I think for Black and Brown communities, a lot of times that means seeking mental health care. And there are a lot of taboos, a lot of really old, stigmas surrounding seeking mental health care within Black communities, particularly, but I think within most communities of color. And I think that is something that we really need to break down, are the barriers to, seeking mental health care. We need to discuss the stigma, why it's there, why it shouldn't be there. And we need to discuss, the type of mental health care that people of color specifically need, because it's not the same as, you know, white people. It's not the same as majority culture. Why? Because we are existing at the bottom rungs of this system, of this hierarchy, of this structure meant to oppress us, right? So there are a lot of things that, you know, certain mental health care practitioners are not going to be aware of or cannot relate to. I can't remember if I brought this up in the first panel or if I brought this up in our conversations, but you know, the idea that during BLM this past summer, my therapist would say, "You're not really scared to go outside, are you?" And I'm looking around like, am I losing it? Like, what's going on? Of course I'm scared to go outside. There's helicopters overhead. I have a huge fro. I'm obviously Black, and we're in the middle of what seems to be, you know, becoming a race war. So things like that, seeking out mental health care that can really speak to your needs and to your identity is a big part of this. But, you know, I just wanted to point out, I think that there are specific reasons also why this is so pressing and important. So about 4 or 5 years ago, statistics started coming out with respect to mental health in Black communities specifically and with children. And, you know, in 2016, the statistic came out that it is like incredibly more likely for 5 to 11-year-old Black kids to commit suicide than white kids. The suicide rate was increasing in that demographic while it was decreasing in the white demographic. And if that doesn't tell you something, that age group and that racial designation, if that doesn't tell you something about the crisis surrounding healthcare for Black people in this country, then I don't know what will. And when we're seeing stuff that young with children who do not have coping mechanisms, who do not have resources to deal with what is happening with their mental health, that is a siren with respect to, you know, what is going on in this country racially and with mental health specifically at the intersection of race and mental health. So I just think it's so incredibly important that Black therapists, that therapists who deal with clients of color, therapists from, you know, a variety of marginalized and minoritized groups, start talking about these issues and making healthcare accessible to people of color and people from those groups.
And Deja, I think we've kind of discussed this before, but in my family, like mental health wasn't really a thing. It wasn't discussed. Therapy wasn't discussed when, you know, most families go through things. And, you know, I grew up as an only child. I am an only child. And when you don't have anybody to talk to, or it is taboo within your own household to even broach the topic, you know, this is where a lot of these issues stem, right? So, Deidre, I don't know if you kind of experience the same thing.
No, and my mom's here and she's going to hate me, but anyway. So I experienced the opposite. I went to therapy as a young child. I have and had ADHD. I was extremely hyperactive as a child. And I went to therapy and I was forced to go to therapy and really hated it for a long time because of that. But I am grateful that I at least knew that therapy was an option and was a system. But I mean, I think part of why in your family, probably in a lot of families of color, therapy is not seen as an option is because it's seen as weakness. Right. And part of our resistance, part of our, you know, perseverance, part of our persisting amidst structural and systemic racism is this idea we're strong. We're stronger than that. We don't need therapy, right? Therapy is for the weak. You know, Black people don't have mental health issues. Asian people don't have mental health issues, right? You're either strong or you're weak. And nothing could be further from the truth. And having a mental health issue does not make you weak. It makes you a normal human, right? So I think a big part of this is a frame shift, a shifting of the narrative within communities of color as well, right? Like it does not make you somehow defective to need to seek a therapist or to need to see a psychiatrist, right? That doesn't make you defective. And I think these are conversations we need to have in our own communities. These are conversations we need to have with our children. Just because something is wrong, you're not wrong, right? We need to be talking about these things because there is very much a reason why Black and Brown communities do not seek out mental health care. You know, there are other reasons as well. The way that, you know, the health system has treated Black and Brown people also, there's a lack of trust there for very good reason. But we need to talk about and address these things because so many families still do not talk about these things.
Deidre, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that is really, really an essential topic for all of us to think about, to you know, go back and talk to our families. Yes, Kakai, I think, Brown just said that it has a lot to do with the church. I was thinking that same exact thing. I think a lot of communities of color are deeply tied to religion and to the church. And I certainly in my family, where the notion was, oh, we'll pray on it, replaced the concept of going to therapy. And there's also, I think, families of color where you are, you know, living in a more insulated or paradigm where you're more protective from protecting yourselves and your people. There's this belief that you can't share what's going on with your family with someone else. And I think you really hit the nail on the head, Deidre, that when there are therapists out there who don't look like us or who don't represent our own struggles, it's really hard to feel like we can get anything from those therapists. And wow, won't it be the day when we can not have to say mental health care and it will just be rolled into health care? Because there is absolutely no reason why our brains and our emotions have to be separate, sort of like dentists. Like, why isn't a dentist also like in the hospital? That never made sense to me. Anyway, we have so many questions. Sadly, we have to wind down our talk, but I'm excited to move on to the Q&A. But before we do that, I would like to introduce Andrew Lewis, who is our current president of UCLA Mixed Alumni. He is going to share with us a few words about our organization, and then we are going to jump into the Q&A. And also, you mentioned resources, Deidre. We will be compiling a list of resources for everyone. If there is a resource, a few people dropped in the chat, like some books and memoirs that they've read. If you have a great resource that you have used that's helped you, or even one that you are an author of, please put that in the chat and we will try to add all those things to our list of resources. That will be emailed to everyone, and it will be available on our website as well. There is also going to be a survey at the end. So please, I would love for you to give us some feedback about this program. And Deidre said, we need to be having more and more conversations. Thank you for saying all of that, because absolutely true. Series like these can go on, and we can take this one little topic and break it out into, 50 different topics. So Andrew, please join us.
Yes,
and
thank you.
Tell us a little bit about Mixed Alumni.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I want to start by first thanking Yule and the panelists today for a great discussion. Like the first one, I've learned a lot, and like the first one, I'm here with the pen and pad taking notes. It's been an incredible discussion. So I don't want to take away from the Q&A too much, but I just wanted to share with folks that our network does have a scholarship available. And it's one of the few of its kind out there nationally that focuses on multiracial students and supporting them. We have given one out previously, and we hope to do so again. And yep, Corey dropped it in the chat if you'd like to contribute. It will go towards supporting a UCLA undergraduate student. It's an interesting experience being mixed as a college student. That could be its own panel. But much of what we discussed, or what was discussed today, also applies to the collegiate mixed experience as well. So if you'd like to support that effort, please go ahead and check out the scholarship in the chat. Once again, thanks to everyone for being here and tuning in, and I'm going to send it right back over to Lay for the Q&A. So thank you, folks.
Thank you, Andrew. Corey, I think you are going to see who's raising their hands. There have been several. Maybe I'll just start off. There was a question that was sent directly to me, and it was, how can we recover from extreme burnout within the workplace, and how can we keep up with our workflow when we're completely depleted? I think that's one that can apply to anyone.
I'll take a stab at it first.
Sure.
So
Good.
my background and expertise is in burnout specifically, and that's seemingly a very simple question, but there are just a lot of different facets to it. And so if you are technically burned out, and there's a very specific definition as supported by the research, it's challenging. Part of the burnout is that it's challenging to continue to work at the same level that you used to work at before. And so that's part of kind of like the paradox of the question, is that if you're burned out, there really is no way for you to continue to push through it at the same rate that you were doing before. And so for my clients who are burned out and maybe don't have the support of their employer, we figure out ways that they can reduce things that they're doing outside of work to open up more time for self-care. And so it's kind of like if you had the flu, right, you would be drinking more fluids and making sure you're getting more sleep and being more proactive or more active with your self-care. It's important that once you're burned out, you find little pockets of time where you can just really focus on nurturing and taking care of yourself. So some of my clients, for instance, they also, they become very critical of themselves, that they're not able to do as much. But that's part of understanding what burnout is, and understanding that that's the nature of burnout. You won't be able to perform at the same level. You won't be as productive as you were before. You will feel a lot more tired. And if you continue to try to push through, it's kind of like if you have an injury, and instead of getting an x-ray and maybe spending less time on your ankle, for instance, if you sprained your ankle, you're just continuing to exercise and run and do all these things, you're just going to hurt it more. So what I encourage my clients to do is pick one task outside of work. If they need something that they need to finish, just pick one task a week and to just really do a fraction of what they used to do before, to again, really give themselves this time and space to heal. Part of it is also identifying where the burnout is coming from. There are a lot of different risk factors associated with burnout, including individual risk factors as well as environmental risk factors. And research shows that it is the environmental factors that play the largest causal role in burnout. And so if you're burned out because you work at a very toxic place, or you have a very toxic manager, or you don't get along with your colleagues, it's just a very negative environment. In the short term, we can figure out ways to help you cope with the environment as it is. In the long term, it just may not be a good fit for you, right? And so depending on the causes of burnout, you would come up with a solution or tackle different things, but certainly there's no substitute for spending more time taking care of yourself, getting more sleep, spending more time in solitude so that you're not expending energy on other people, and some of the tips that we talked about earlier as well. But I guess in short, to not have the expectation that you're going to continue to be as productive or as effective as you were before if you are burned out. Now, if you're heading toward burnout, there are also intervention strategies that we can use before you get into full burnout mode that can help prevent you feeling fully burned out. But once you're there, there's really no substitute for taking more time for yourself. That really is the only way to slowly come out of it.
To kind of mirror that, again, I think I kind of had the extreme case where I physically removed myself from New York, but I feel like I was pretty much burned out for maybe a year and knew, like you said, I could not continue as I was doing with my agency, my clients, the people around me. I just made a decision that this was enough. And if I was going to be happy, if I was going to make a life change, I had to make a drastic one, right? So removing myself from New York, I'm still doing the same work. I'm still doing the same amount of work, but I'm doing it in a different environment where I'm actually happy. So I'm doing the same grind. I'm still doing the same hustle, but the people that are around me are different. The agency that I work with is different, and just being in LA, you're in sun, you're in nature all the time. So, just finding ways to make adjustments in your life that will kind of take you out of that kind of trajectory that you're going to make yourself happier.
So I saw that Corey added something to the chat from, I think it's Cyan, apologies if I mispronounced your name, with respect to, sorry, scrolling back up, how do we deliver ourselves from the I'm not doing enough-itis, which I have definitely suffered from for a long time. So I think two things. I think taking an inventory of what you actually are doing can really help you to reflect on the fact that you are doing enough. that can be very helpful. But I also think taking a step back and realizing that this burden is not yours to bear alone. Right? Like, we did not put ourselves here. We did not create this situation. We did not create structural systemic racism. We didn't create, all of these different systems and structures. It is not our job to disrupt all of them single-handedly. And I think reminding yourself of that repetitively, which I frequently have to do, like I have to check myself multiple times a day to say, you don't have to fix everything. It's not within your power to fix everything, is really important. But I'm staring at a whiteboard right now where I actually listed all of the different ways that I am contributing. And that for me is really important, so that when I'm freaking out thinking, oh, I need to do so much more, there's this other project that I really need to work on, these people need me, this needs me, I can look at it and say, okay, like you're doing a lot, you're doing quite a bit right now. So I think that is a really good way to kind of check yourself and check back into the reality of the situation.
And also, I feel like we have been programmed in this particular mindset that we always have to be busy. We always have to be doing something, when you don't have to. You can take a break. You don't have to do anything on Saturday. You don't have to work on Saturday. So it's just kind of changing your mindset with being okay with not having to be busy all of the time. Because I feel like most of the people that actually think this way are doing all the things, doing every single thing. So being able just to take a break and just take a step back and reflect on what you're doing, where you're headed, and just taking a break in life will actually probably help you be more productive and help you find your happiness as well.
Yeah, and I think Alona can probably speak to this best, but Lindsay Alvarez asked a question, and I just wanted to point out a lot of therapists have sliding scales. So even if you have health insurance like I do, but your health insurance network is like, no, you can't ask for a therapist of color. You can specifically ask a certain therapist or a certain therapy network if they do have sliding scale, and they oftentimes will be able to accommodate you at a less expensive price than what they would charge you if you were reaching through your insurance network. So I think that's just like a first step to keep in mind. It might not be as expensive as you're expecting it to be, based, depending on your financial situation.
Also, just throw out for as a resource for those looking for low cost therapy, and Alona, maybe you have some resources for that as well. But there's the Maple Center, I believe, that has a sliding scale based on your income. And then also look to the graduate schools that award degrees for MFT or PsyD. Those therapists in training are in programs where they are mentored, and that can be a source for low-cost therapy as well.
Absolutely. Those are all really good resources. When it comes to insurance specifically, though, you may not be able to request a therapist of color. You can typically go onto your benefits page or wherever it is that you seek out specialists, and just go through the names and kind of start calling people and asking, right? I've had clients who've interviewed me, right? Because part of the consultation is we're making sure that we're a good match. And I've had clients who've interviewed me and who have asked me, what experience do you have working with Black women? What is your background? And typically I don't answer personal questions, but in that context, I answer that question because I understand why it's important. It's not because they're just like curious, right? It's because they want to make sure that I can understand them, that I can somewhat relate to the experience. And so it's perfectly fine to look at names. Most therapists have some profile on some website. So you probably can't tell by the name unless let's say you're looking for a Latina therapist and you could recognize the name. But even then, that person could just be married to somebody who is, right? And so just start copying and pasting into Google and finding what these people look like. It's perfectly appropriate. Because there's so much stigma when it comes to mental health in certain communities, I have had both experiences where somebody just really prefers like a Black woman client who really wants a Black woman therapist because she doesn't want to feel like she has to explain everything. But I've also had the opposite experience where, because of the stigma in the community, people don't want somebody who's in the community, even though they know I'm a therapist and I have to keep things confidential. They just want somebody who's certainly worked with people of all sorts of different backgrounds and can relate or understand what their experience is, at least from a professional sense. But sometimes they don't want to have a therapist who's in their community because of this concern, right? That they might see them at church, or they might be a friend of a friend of a friend or something within their network. And so don't be discouraged when you're looking for therapists, and it's perfectly appropriate to interview your therapist. But if you really want, I think the most affordable option is for most people through their insurance. A lot of insurances today, I know, are also waiving their copay because of COVID and everything that's going on, but that's probably the most affordable option. Community mental health clinics are the second most affordable option, and Maple Center is a great one. There's also Airport Marina Counseling. There are a lot of different centers. It just depends on where in Los Angeles you're located. So just Googling, your zip code and putting community mental health, you'll get a lot of options that way. 211 is a really good resource. It's an informational directory. So you call them, you let them know what you're looking for, your zip code, and they can get you some numbers as well. And then I think sliding scale is probably the next most affordable option. And then finally, just full fee therapy. And so when it comes to these types of financial investments, I think it's important. The priority should really be finding somebody who's a good fit. And certainly we all have a budget that we have to work within, but just keeping in mind that you're doing this for yourself, right? This is an investment in yourself. This is an investment in your short-term and long-term well-being. And so if you have to suspend some other type of expenses to make it work with somebody that you really feel connected with, I think it's worthwhile doing. But again, please don't be discouraged if it takes you a minute to find somebody. Because of COVID, a lot of therapists are pretty booked up. And so it might take you a few phone calls, it might take you a few emails. Just continue to reach out to people and make a connection with one that you're really gonna fit well with and do good work with.
And it's totally fine to go to a therapist and then decide it's not a good fit and seek out a therapist. You're allowed to do that. I've done it. Lots of people do it. That's totally fine. And there are a lot of barriers with certain big healthcare networks, Kaiser being one of them. I know a lot of people at UCLA have Kaiser if they work with UCLA or through UCLA. It can be hard. You might need to call several times. You might need to get someone who's in a managerial role on the phone to bypass some of the hoops that they make you jump through. I also think we should talk about normalizing that. That shouldn't be normal, but it is. So just know that those barriers do exist and that a lot of people encounter them. And please don't stop seeking therapy or stop seeking a psychiatrist if you think you need medication because they're pushing back or saying it's going to take 3 months or 4 months. Just keep calling, keep asking for who the next person is that you can talk to.
Yeah, I'm actually doing this right now, just to be completely transparent. And with my experience, I called my provider and they gave me a list of in-network therapists. And so I just did my own Googling and just went down the list to see who I would think I would have a good fit with, but I'm actually in the process of finding the right person for me. And honestly, this took me 30 plus years to figure out that, yes, I probably could benefit from a therapist. So yeah, it's never too late. And I would definitely recommend it, especially with COVID and everything going on.
Those are really
address that last.
Thank you so much. We're almost getting to our hour. We have one more really, really important question that's come through from Lauren Yang that I wanted to throw out to the panel. And it's, how do I advocate for myself at an institution that does not adequately support and acknowledge the impact of recent ongoing events? I wanted to bring this up because it's so topical. I want to continue speaking up, but also trying to take care of myself. What is your suggestion for Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of suggestions for this. So first, talk to HR. That should be your first step. I know that's not always the most helpful at all organizations, so you might have already done that. My next suggestion would be find other like-minded individuals. A lot of this is about burden sharing and the collective, right? There are other people at your job who are likely feeling very similar to you, even if it's not, as deeply held. I'm not sure if you identify with, what happened. I'm not sure what your racial or ethnic identity is, but if you are Asian and you are feeling this the same way that a Black person would have been feeling this summer with George Floyd, I am sure that there are other like-minded individuals. And I think that by kind of tapping in and out with people like that, you can share the burden with respect to who is going to be annoying at your organization on a given day. And, just demanding that there is, some sort of coverage of these issues and that there are resources provided to you all in this situation. The last thing I would say here is you know, other people might disagree with me about this, but I think that it is oftentimes a good tactic to use when all else fails, to find other organizations that are doing a better job and to show your organization exactly what it is that they could be doing based on what other organizations are doing, right? So find, you know, an open letter like the one that Snapchat's Una King wrote this summer after the George Floyd incident. Find another organization that is making a public forum, you know, for their employees to talk about these things and show your organization that those things are happening, right? I think it's really important to kind of push organizations into the fold with respect to these sorts of things. So those three things: go to HR, try to, you know, build a collective to burden share, and if all else fails, show your organization other organizations are doing better, and this is how, and this is what you should be doing too.
Wow, this was so amazing. Thank you so much to our panel, Deidre, Christina, and Alona. You ladies have been so informative and comforting and just so amazing. I really think that we have opened up Pandora's box, for lack of a better term, but I am hoping that we can create some sort of ongoing series. And I would like to invite you back in the future to join us. And thank you to all of our participants. Thank you for being here with us for parts 1 and part 2. If you know people who could benefit from hearing these conversations, please forward the replays on to them. The replay for part 2 will also be on our website. If you can, please complete the survey. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and take care of yourselves and be well.